it's good to see all of you. I am always grateful. First of all, I'm grateful to the Spirit of God for the power and the ability to stand here, to stand at all. That's a blessing. I am grateful to the pastor. I told him when I decided it was time for me to move on to do something different. I told him, but whenever you need me, call me and I will be there. And so here I am. And anytime you all call, I will be here. So just let me know. Most of you have my phone number. All right. It's good to see my family. I never see you all sitting this close. My wife and my daughter just sitting up here. And it's wonderful to see an old friend. Hey, hey. Not saying you're old, because you're younger than me. But it's so great to see Scott. We go way back, way back. Some of you may remember we used to have an evening worship called Spirit at First MCC, when we were First MCC. And Scott was our musician at that time. And I've never seen anybody who could take an Allen organ and make it sound like a Hammond like you can. And I am just so it's just so wonderful to see you. It's just, I was so excited when I heard that you were going to be back be here as the minister of music here. So I know you're doing a wonderful job, and I know you all are enjoying Scott, and it's just so nice to be here with everybody together. So I'm not going to keep talking, not going to ramble on, and I'm not even going to bother saying this is going to be a short sermon, because I don't know. But I will ask you to join me in a second or two of prayer. We give thanks to the presence of God that's in the room already. We give thanks for all that we've already experienced, for the music, for the words, for the spirit of each person that's in the room. I ask that you all would believe with me that my ego, my fears, whatever could get in the way of this message would not be present and would not have the power, but the power would come from the Spirit of God that's in the room, and we'll be able to receive the message that each of us is intended to hear. And we just know that's going to be, so we say together, and so it is. And so it is. Master, the tempest is raging. The billows are tossing high. The sky is all shadowed with blackness. No shelter or hope is nigh. Carest thou not that we perish? How can thou lie asleep when it seems like each moment so madly it's threatening, a grave in the angry deep? The winds and the waves shall obey my will. Peace be still, peace be still. Whether the wrath of the storm-tossed sea, or demons or men or whatever it be, no water can swallow the ship where lies the master of oceans and earth and skies. They sweetly obey my will. Peace be still. Peace be still. Some of you might be familiar with that old song coming from James Cleveland from back in the day. It's a very powerful song, and when you really listen to it, it was the song that got my sister through her time of illness when she was dealing with esophageal cancer. She held on to that song, Peace Be Still. We played it for her at the hospital. I used to remind her of it on the phone. We played it at her memorial service. And that song, Peace Be Still, will bring us comfort when the storms of life start to rage. It's been on my mind quite a bit lately, and I'm sure you can understand. I suppose you don't have to wonder why, because most recently, and just this past week, we watched as the reports of how Puerto Rico and other islands were devastated by a monster Category 4 storm by the name of Maria. And it passed directly over 3.5 million people who lived in the area. And then prior to that, who was it? Irma. And prior to Irma, who was it? Harvey. And we saw destruction that went through Florida last week. I was in Florida last weekend. And it was strange to see that here it was a week after Irma almost, and still people were getting their power back. And still stores were closed. We went to a store on last Sunday morning, I think it was, and we weren't even sure if it was open because there was not a car there. And they said, well, we just opened. because we were closed, we didn't have any power. And it was just very interesting to see what is going on, because it looks like and it feels like storms just keep coming. When one is devastating one area, something else seems to be brewing, and it's coming up behind the last one. I don't even know what letter of the alphabet the next one will be. But it just seems like things just keep going and going. My mother seems to think, I don't know about any of your parents, I don't know about any of you, but my mother said, when I look at the storms that keep coming, when I look at the fires in the West, when I look at the rumors of war and the nuclear threats, when I look at everything that's going on, it must be getting close to end times. I said, well, Ma, I don't know about all that. I really don't. But I do think it's time for us to listen to what this planet that supports us is saying to our lives, what it's saying about how we impact the land, how we treat one another, how we respect nature. It's telling us something, and it's time for us to listen. I didn't come here today, though, to bring you a whole bunch of bad news. I'm not telling you anything you don't know about. But I came here because I want to take every opportunity to bring to our awareness the fact that there are things that are devastating the lives of our brothers and sisters that we share this planet with. And there are things that are devastating our planet. And so I just wanted to talk about that a little bit today and share with you some thoughts about storms. Because we all have storms. I don't know about you, I have them. Most people I know have them, but most of us know we experience them. But I'm not just talking about the physical storms. I'm not just talking about meteorological storms. I'm talking about emotional storms. I'm talking about psychological storms. I'm talking about storms that come our way and they tear at our life and tear things away, and it's not just the trees, but it's your spirit. Seems like storms are coming to tear pieces of us apart, little bit by bit, things that come into our lives. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be devastated by a storm. I was encouraged last week, even during the time that I was thinking about the hurricanes. I was encouraged by two things. I was reminded by something Barack Obama said. He said, this is the moment when we must come together to save the planet. Let us resolve that we will not leave our children a world where the storms rise and famine spreads and terrible storms devastate our lands. Let's not leave our children with a place that's uninhabitable. Let's do what we can do to take care of the planet and to take care of each other, but take care of yourself in the midst of it. But what I read on a Time magazine cover last week, as I said, started to say, really encouraged me. It had a picture of what the weather report looks like when the storms, they're showing the hurricanes and stuff. It had that on the cover. But over top of the storm, the images of a storm, it had words that say, the storms keep getting stronger, and so do we. The storms keep getting stronger, and so do we. You know, there was a lot of devastation that we saw during the time that all these storms were going through, but there was also there were great stories of survival that we saw. I don't know if you watched the news much, but it wasn't all bad news. There was a lot of people who were helping one another and were making it through on their own and were doing what they needed to do to survive. And so many people did survive. Many more than would have in former storms because we were more prepared this time. And so we were ready to go. So my question for you today is, what do you do in your life to weather your storms? What do you do when the wind starts to blow in your life? What do you start to do when the seas of your life start to get rough, when your spirit gets troubled? What do you do when it seems like, as the song says, when it seems like so madly it's threatening, a grave in the angry deep? What do you do? when your mind and your finances and everything around you start to fall apart, what do you do? I like what Ralph Waldo Emerson said. He said, the wise man, or I'll say woman, in the storm prays to God, not for safety from danger, but for deliverance from fear. It's the storm within that endangers us, not the storm without. It's the storm within. How do we silence the winds when they're blowing inside of us? What do we do when we become so fearful that we don't know where to turn next? What do we do, my friends, when you hear and see that there's a storm on the horizon? Well, I go back to this text that was read for you a little while ago, that you all read together, I believe, where it talks about, I'll read it to you again. A great gale arose, and the waves beat on the boat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And he woke up, and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, Peace, be still. And then the wind ceased, and there was dead calm. You know, there's a bit of a disagreement about these words, where they came from and what their purpose was. But most biblical scholars think that this was written to Christians living in Rome who were still undergoing some period of persecution. Some think it was written to Christians in Rome after a Jewish revolt, when it was a time where there was a lot of political turmoil and a lot of anti-Christian sentiment. But whenever it was written, the Christians were typically persons of lower class. And, you know, whenever there's a storm, it's the people of the lower class that get most affected. If you think about it, you think about the people who can't get away because they don't have the means to get away. You think of the people who live in the low-lying areas. It's the people who can't afford to live someplace else. But in this text, it's believed that the writer was writing to a group of people who were the lower class people, and they were people who had real social, political, and socioeconomic issues in their life. And it was written to a group of people, and by extension written to us, to encourage us and them. What do you do when the waves start to beat up against you? What do you do when they're crashing into your life? In the text, we read that the disciples were with Jesus out on the water, and the winds start to rise, and before they know it, they're in the midst of a full-blown storm. It must have been like a Category 4 or 5. Must have been huge, because the text tells us that they were terrified, and they didn't know what to do. But we know that some of these people, at least 4 of the disciples, were fishermen, which means they had been out on the water many times, and they had been in storms before. So why in this one were they so terrified? Why in this one did they think they were going to die? Why in this storm was it so horrifying that they had to go wake Jesus up and say, don't you care that we're perishing? Well, they went to wake Jesus up. But instead of freaking out, he got up, assessed the situation, looked at the water, looked at the waves, realized that the issue is not the water, the issue is the waves. And it's issue of the waves because it's not the wave, it's the wind. And so he said to the wind, peace, be still. He didn't say, ain't it awful? He didn't say, oh my Lord, we're going to die. He didn't say, Lord Jesus, it's a fire. He said, peace, be still. So from that text, there are a few things that we can take away that help us see how we deal with the storms that come into our lives. Number one, we can see from this story that you never know when a storm's going to come up in your life. You never know when the water's going to get rough. you know, because the text says that they pushed out into the water, and it was at night. Now, I'm sure that if it had been storming already, they would not have pushed out into the water. It wasn't until they got into the water that the gales started blowing, and then the water got rough. And isn't that what happens in your life and my life? Everything's going smooth, and all of a sudden, the engine goes out in your car. Everything's going smooth, and all of a sudden, a sickness comes. In my own life, things were going smooth in our life, in my family's life, and then my sister got sick. We didn't know she was going to have cancer. We didn't know we were going to go through 2 years of her being sick. We didn't know that storm was coming into our lives. When my mom called 3 months ago and said, I have breast cancer, I didn't know that storm was coming. But the storm came out of nowhere. Who would think an 81-year-old woman is going to call and say, now I have breast cancer? That storm came out of nowhere. When I lost my job and I was unemployed for 2 years, that was a storm. It was a long storm, but that came out of nowhere. I thought I was safe. And then one day they just come back and they tell you a storm just hit you. Pack your stuff and get out. I didn't know there was a storm coming when there was a clerical error, and I got arrested and found my behind in jail. There was a storm that came into my life out of nowhere. My car was parked on the side of the road, and then here comes a big old wave. That's how our lives are. But the secret is to know that there's somewhere to go when the storm comes. Is to know that there's some place to turn to. And I would challenge all of us. See, these disciples knew they could go to Jesus who was on the ship. But I would suggest to us that Jesus, even in this story, is a symbol of the fact that there's a spiritual place in all of us that we need to be prepared to go to inside of ourselves when the wind starts to blow. We ought to go and be, as the old folks used to say, be prayed up. You ought to be able to have something inside of you that's already stoked up. Maybe it's because you took some time for meditation, and so there's a place in your spirit that is just calm, that you know that I don't have to get riled by everything that's going on outside of me. Maybe we ought to meditate enough and pray enough and get quiet and still enough that we're not afraid to go to that place. Because, you know, some of us don't have that place because we're afraid to go to that place. Because some of us don't want to prepare that place because it takes quiet to prepare that place. And in the quiet, you can hear all your thoughts. You can deal with all your stuff. See, some of us don't like to get quiet. Some of us don't like to try to meditate because you start to hear your own doubts. You start to hear your own fears. You start to relive things in your past. You start to relive things come alive in the quiet that you don't know how to shut out. But I just want to give you a little hint. You can choose to just shut it out. You don't have to go through any major thing. You can just choose to shut it out. You could just, when you're learning how to meditate, let me just share this with you. When you're learning how to meditate, thoughts are going to come in your mind. And a lot of people give up because they say, well, I can't block out the thoughts. But the secret is to let the thought just flow through. Recognize it, say, I see you, and let it flow through. Because if you put your mind on trying to block it out, then you're not going to be able to shut your mind down. But if you just let it float through and let it go by, and before you know it, you're going to reach a place of peace and a place of calm. And it's that kind of space that we need to have in our spirit so that we know when the difficult times come, there's some place I can go, like the disciples went to Jesus. Sometimes we have to know that the Spirit of God is present. So we can go to this place where we connect with the Spirit of God that gives us courage, that gives us power, that gives us the strength to stand our storms. So number one, you never know when the storm's going to come into your life. But let's go on to number two. Number two is, we can learn from this story, don't get pulled into other people's drama. Don't be pulled into other people's drama. Jesus was the model and the prototype of our spiritual center and our power. Jesus showed us what it was like to live in this world with the awareness of God 24/7. Jesus, we knew, was the one that was centered. That's why the disciples went to Jesus in the first place, because they said, you understand the power of God in a way that we don't. So we need you to be aware of what's going on right here. You know, when I was used to travel a lot on business, and there was we were going somewhere, and somehow the person around me, sitting next to me, somehow, I guess based on what I was reading and we had conversation, they found that I was a minister. And they said, well, I know we're going to be all right now because you're here. And I said, really? Is that true? Who am I going to lean on? But I had something and someone to lean on. And there's things that I do when I'm afraid, that I go to the center in me where I know, you know what, no matter what, I don't care how rough the wind gets. I don't care if the ship goes down. I know I'm all right because I have a connection already with the Spirit of God that's in me, through me, around me, living as me. I understand that God is all there is. So when the ship starts to sink and when things start to get rough, I'm okay because I don't have to join everybody else's drama. I can get quiet. And I can be like Jesus, but just be chilling when the wind's starting to blow. But, you know, when they woke Jesus up, they went to Jesus. And this is how folks do. If you're not a drama queen and you can deal with the issues that come into your life without going crazy, then people are going to look at you like you just don't care. How come you're not going crazy like we are? Don't you realize how serious the situation is? You know, I got drawn into that kind of stuff. I'm going to tell you 2 stories. I was only going to tell you 1. But it's something about y'all that pull out the stories out of me, and I just got to tell it. But the first thing that I was going to share with you was one time I was about 19, and I went in past the room where my little nephew was. He was only about a few weeks old. And I passed his room, well, the room where he was supposed to be, and all I saw was my sister standing there like with this look of terror. And I looked down at the baby, and the baby was like getting ready to turn blue. And I picked up the baby with one hand, and I have to beg your pardon. But has anybody ever seen Moonstruck? I had one of those moments. I had the baby with one arm, and I turned to my sister with the other hand and said, snap out of it. She panicked, and all the baby needed was for somebody to pick him up, pat him on the back, and he was going to be all right. But my sister, I agree. I loved my sister. I still love my sister, but she was a drama queen. And she would go into panic mode. And I'm going to tell you the second story. There was a time I was dating somebody and had loaned them my car. And we had a really bad argument. My sister was in town. She was visiting. And my sister said, you loan them your car and they're going to treat you like that? You need to go get your car. Well, I don't panic and I don't react like things like that. It was fine to me. It was just a car. But I listened to my sister, and I got all excited. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I need to go get my car. So I went and got my spare key and went and took my car while this person was sleeping. And I got home and came to my senses. And said, you joined somebody else's drama. You let somebody take a situation that was yours to handle and tell you how to handle it. Don't listen to other people's drama. See, the difference between what happened with Jesus and what was going on with the disciples is Jesus understood the difference between reacting and responding. There's a difference because when we just look at a situation and react, that's an emotional response to it. But if we look at something and respond, that's a more intellectual response to it because you take time to analyze. You take time to look at it. You take time to talk to yourself so you don't come outside of your real self and do something stupid like go take a car in the middle of the night. So, during the hurricane, I read something that there was a moment where people were in a shelter. And it was like 4,000 people in that shelter. And somebody posted on Facebook, first of all, if I was in a shelter in the middle of a storm, I wouldn't be looking on Facebook. But somebody posted on Facebook that this particular shelter was unsafe. And I read, it was in Lee County, Florida, and I read that all of a sudden mass hysteria broke out in this place because somebody saw it on Facebook, and somebody told somebody else, and somebody told somebody else, and before you know it, everybody's crazy. But that's how we do. If we're not centered enough to say, wait a minute, where'd you get that information? And if you're not centered enough to say, wait a minute, there's no place else for us to go in this storm. So why are we going to get crazy? My friends, we need to be able to say to ourselves during the time when life gets rough, we need to be able to say to ourselves, I can keep my peaceful center no matter what's going on. We need to learn how to say those words, peace, be still. We need to be able to look at the problems in our life and say, peace, be still. I'm not going to react to you. I'm going to respond to you. I'm going to take care of the situation, but I'm not going to panic. I believe it was Anne Graham Lotz who said, when the storms of life come, if they come to me personally, to my family, to the world, or to those around me, I want to be strong enough to stand and be a strength to somebody else and to be a shelter to somebody else. I don't want to be the one that falls apart. What do you want to be, my friends? Because my third point is, in every storm, there's an opportunity to evolve and to grow. When you come into a storm, you're going to be different when you go out of the storm. The question is, do you want to come out of the storm better? Or do you want to come out of the storm torn apart? Because the storms of our lives, they're going to change us. When that article said that the storms get stronger and so do we, what the article meant is we've had bad storms. And yes, they do seem to get worse. But we seem to get better. Because when Katrina happened, there was nobody mobilized. We didn't know how to handle it. The government was in an ain't it awful kind of space. And so this time, even the government was more prepared. The city government, the county government, the federal government, everybody was more prepared for this storm than they were for storms in the past, for these last couple of storms, because we learned from the other storms. So when the storms come in your life, my friends, what did you learn? What do you want? What do you see that you can change? How can you be stronger, better, more centered, more powerful for your storms that are going to come in your life? Because I'm going to tell you, there are storms coming. There are more hurricanes coming. There's going to be maybe snowstorms coming. I'm going to tell you, the car's going to break down. The lights aren't going to work sometime. There's going to be issues with our houses. There's going to be issues with our health. There are going to be issues that come into our life. Storms are going to keep coming. They never stop. But they don't have to take you down. I want you to do a favor for me. I want you to close your eyes. I want you to remember a storm that you experienced in your life. Maybe it was a meteorological storm. Maybe it was an emotional storm. Maybe it was a psychological storm. Maybe it was a physical storm. Could have been an illness. Could have been a breakup. Could have been a job loss. Could have been the loss of a loved one. Remember what it felt like when you were in that storm. Now open your eyes. Look around. You made it through the storm. You did not go under in that storm. You're probably stronger now than when you were in that storm. You probably have a whole different level of understanding than what you had when that storm started. I don't care if it was a psychological break. I don't care if it was a breakup. I don't care. Whoever walked out, it's okay. Bless them. Let them go on their way. Because you're stronger because of it. I look at my wife sometime and I say, praise God for the things that I thought I could not make it through. Because God brought me what I needed. And I believe what I deserved after all that crap I went through. But I wanted to just share with you, and I'm going to end now. I just want you to know you made it through storms in your life. You came through stronger. You came through better. There are going to be storms. The storms keep coming, and the storms keep getting stronger, but so do you. So, my friends, the writer of this text was trying to say to those Christians, you may be going through persecution. You may be going through problems. You may be going through some really rough times, but you can hold on. He was trying to say to them, storms are going to come, but you can make it. Center yourself. Know who you are. Know whose you are. Know the power you have. And keep stepping. And learn how to say in your life, peace, be still.